We've got a terrific panel for you from Melbourne, as usual. Columnist with the Herald Weekly Times, Terry McCrann, and also with him from Melbourne, contributing economics editor at the Australian newspaper, Judith Sloan. Terry, I'll start with you. Unelected, but very important, Kerry Schott. What do you make of that?
Well, I would have think that what the Prime Minister would be saying is, can we have your resignation letter in the next mail? Thank you, Kerry. I mean, this is the woman that's charged with overseeing the security of our power supply, and she's happy to say that she's presiding over a project, an insane project, which is driving out that reliable supply in a haphazard and completely unplanned manner. And she's gloating in the fact that this is happening. Clearly, we have a disaster brewing in terms of making our coal-fired power generation unviable when it's the only basis on which we're going to get reliable power anytime soon, anytime this side of 2040, or probably the 12th of never.
And the prosperity and the jobs required to pay back that $1 trillion of debt that's headed our way. Related to all of this, I've got to go to you, Judith. This story out of the United States, state of emergency, North Carolina, after a cyber attack on one of the biggest domestic fuel pipelines. It's called the Colonial pipeline. Apparently, the Biden administration say, we're told, this attack originated in Russia. Huge lines at petrol stations right across the East Coast. It's crippled fuel supply. This is a real sort of caught with your pants down moment. How confident are you that we've got our house in order?
Look, I think it's a really important development because what it shows you is how dependent we are on fuel supplies, but also how fragile the potential of the supply of those supplies. So, in fact, the US has a kind of quite busy network of pipelines, but some are more important than others. And I mean, one of the theories at the moment is that the consequence of this cyber attack is to drive up the price of gas and petroleum products, right? And that, of course, is not good for an economy. Russia is a very big gas producer and supplier to Europe in particular. And I think it does have worrying consequences. I mean, I think we should realise that we have similar fragilities. And there were some, I think, quite welcome announcements in the budget about basically improving our fuel security, because the truth of the matter is that we wouldn't last many days.
I want to go to some of the detail in the budget. I talked briefly going into the break about migration. And Terry, I'll come to you on this one. Net overseas migration, the budget's forecasting, even with slow rollout of the vaccine and COVID still being an issue, at 77,000 people will come to Australia over the next year, starting in the middle of this year, heading out to 235,000, back to those really big numbers we saw in the Rudd years at the end of the Turnbull years. That will occur, they say, 2024, 25. Now, if you're a big Australia type, you'll be happy with all of that. What's your take? I have a level of concern that we haven't used this pause in migration to have the conversation we should have about what sort of size do we want Australia to consume in migration terms year on year.
Well, it's in the sort of virtual unreality that the whole budget is predicated on, Peter. I mean, apart from the fact that, no, we haven't taken the opportunity to have that conversation, which is absolutely fundamental to have what sort of functioning Australia we're going to get through the 2020s and into the 2030s, but just in terms of the basic unreality that we can, that suddenly everything's going to be fine starting from the middle of next year, and that the pandemic, the virus, the vaccines will work, all this will suddenly be cured, and we can go back almost overnight to bring in tens of thousands of visitors. And we're not only talking about those permanent migrants, we're talking about, because if we're bringing in 250,000 migrants, we're also bringing in at least that many tourists each year, much more than that, in fact. And the idea that we're going to move seamlessly to a post-virus world is just crazy beyond belief. But the most fundamental thing is we want to go back to this Ponzi scheme of just bringing in more and more people, pouring them into Melbourne and Sydney because that's where they will go, and building more and more freeways, more and more infrastructure, chasing our tails in trying to catch up and thinking that is prosperity. Well, I mean, what does Josh Frydenberg want to achieve? Turning the average property price in Melbourne into $2 million and in Sydney into $2 million plus? Is that the objective of all this, that we get the sort of fake wealth by having ever escalating property prices?
Yeah, but this is the power of the business lobby here, isn't it, Judith? Because they want wages to be depressed, and that's obviously migration's key in that, more workers coming in. And it also means demand for their products is up.
Yes, so the Treasury has formed a new group called the Centre for Population, which as far as I can see is just a propaganda unit promoting very high rates of immigration. There's no doubt the government is under extreme pressure from the business community to, as you say, for both supply at reasonable wages and demand considerations. But the truth of the matter is they need to govern for the national interest. Now, you think of agriculture, Peter, that is a sector you're familiar with. Now, in the past, we managed without great armies of migrant workers. And, you know, let's face it, there are examples of mistreatment of migrant workers. Now, what happens, the research is very clear. You bring in the migrant workers, they suppress wages, and so the locals retreat. Now, it's very hard to bring the locals back. But if we do this for a few years, we may be able to lick this dilemma. But if the anticipation is that in, 2, perhaps even slightly less than 2 years, these migrants, international students, working holiday makers and the like will be back, then I think that won't happen.
Yeah, this is the madness, though. We keep importing the workers and put more and more of our own young people on welfare schemes without having the political tough reform conversation about what point in this country do we say, sorry, no more welfare for you. You are fit and you are able. You have to work. Got to leave it there. Terry McCrann, Judith Sloan, thank you for your time.
Pleasure, Peter.